Hello and welcome to the Lobster Pot. And we're doing day 2 of the Product Earth seminars from back in September, whenever it was. I think it was early September. I can't remember. I was there day 1. We're just, as was my guest, we're kind of like doing our thing. And then day 2, oh, there is no day 2. But, I need from Gloucestershire. But my guest here today, Lambert, who you probably know if you've been to any international shows, is the international man of marijuana, Lambert from Grove Bags. You came all the way from California for the show, didn't you, sir?
I did. And being 3/4 English, it's always like going home. So I always look forward to any shows in England. But to your point, out of a few hundred shows I've done in my career, never had I experienced a venue shutting down day 2. So that was kind of sad and felt bad for the Product Earth team because it is traditionally a great show, in the UK. So, but here we are.
Here we are indeed. But again, I think this is probably a topic very close to your heart, cannabis packaging. But yeah, let's take it away and we'll keep chatting. So lead the way, sir, and we'll crack on.
Definitely. So yeah, one thing that comes up a lot, especially with cannabis legalizing, not just here in the States, but around the world, is the packaging and navigating the branding and quality and regulation post-harvest. Always interesting subjects for all. So we'll kind of jump right into it. And just a bit of an overview is just kind of talking about, the legalization and expanding programs and how this affects businesses and what they need to comply to and what they need to do to obviously grow their brand along the way. So we'll talk a little bit about branding, the importance of branding, regulatory compliance, and then just a few takeaways to plan ahead for wherever your business is, especially if plant touching and offering end user product. We'll also get into a bit of curing and storing. A lot of people, myself being a grower, we put so much emphasis on growing, but don't understand that that's really half the battle. Really what you do with that plant and that flower after takedown is quite detrimental to what the end user's experience is. So we'll get into that. The consequences of bad packaging. We just wrapped up a recent study with a group out here in the US, based out of North Carolina. We can touch a little bit on that. And then just overview of traditional packaging materials that most use.
Very cool.
So commercial packaging and cannabis packaging, right? So for any of us that come from the traditional market, myself included, a few of these containers look quite familiar, right? So a lot of people using jars, using simple little plastic baggies, even not to date myself, but back with the advent, the 35 millimeter cameras, the little containers that held those camera rolls. We used to use those as little stash containers. So there's obviously some old methodology around packaging prior to legalization. That expands all the way into, some of the things that you still see today. You still see, again, glass jars on shelves, bin liners, turkey bags, which was a trend that started out here on the West Coast in the US, which again, with this recent study we did, found out that that's one of the worst ways to store flour, which was quite interesting.
Very cool.
Consequences. So this is one thing where a lot of people think, oh, I've got everything set as long as I make sure I hold it, control it, and have it in a safe environment. But this is an interesting biomass, and not that we like to compare it to the tobacco industry, but unlike tobacco, where it has a natural inhibitor of microbials, that being nicotine, the cannabis plant doesn't have that. So one of the ways to protect it and keep it fresh is actually have that right moisture content level. But anything over 65% relative humidity or about 14.5% moisture content is just too wet. And that's when you start seeing microbials pop off. And that's when white powdery mildew, mold, the kind of things that you obviously don't want to consume come into the equation there. So making sure you store it properly, mitigating any mold probability, obviously retaining the potency, retaining that weight, because obviously if you lose moisture, that equals weight, right? And then the diminishing bag appeal. Another thing, if you're exposing that product to oxygen, obviously it oxidizes, turns more like a browner color. Not that it can't still be consumed, it's just obviously evolving into something that's less desirable to consume is what it means at the end of the day. So we kind of talk about, and I'm not big on infomercials, but the reason why I brought this into the mix is just because of some of the things that matter. And so we do use this, DUWAHU is the acronym we use, but it does kind of reference the things, making sure that you have the oxygen balanced, that you create a non-static or low static environment to retain those trichomes, having that balanced humidity, and then keeping it protected from UV light. And again, that's where some of the conventional, a glass jar is not UV protectant, a turkey bag is not UV protectant. So did pull us up just to kind of show some of those major points that you want to be mindful of post-harvest.
I'm going to say it took me a moment to get the do wahoo thing, but I got there. I like
Quite
that.
a long acronym, huh? I know, right?
But that's cool. I'd actually love to see a cannabis infomercial at some point. That would be awesome. So
There you go. There you go. Where branding matters, this is one thing. And while it was quite challenging, again, in the traditional market, it's not like dealers had storefronts or places to be able to build brand recognition for themselves or for the specific cultivars they carry. But where branding does matter now is in the legal market, with making sure that it's got, the aesthetics, the consumer preference, on packet messaging. So what is this cultivar? What is the potency? Maybe if it's indoor, outdoor, mixed light or light depth grown. These are all things that people care about. And obviously it's relevant in legal markets.
In terms of, sorry, just a question around that. I
Yeah.
guess it kind of varies between states, I would imagine, what you can and can't put on packaging. I know that in Canada, the actual packaging itself kind of has to be very sort of straightforward. I think it's black with a small logo or something like that. But actually in stores themselves, they have this kind of vast cornucopia of colors, and it's like, oh, but when you actually come to buy it, it's like, oh, kind of thing. Is that similar in the US?
So it is, it's interesting because it does vary from state to state. And to your point, technically there's some level of legalization in 46 states now out of 50. So there is quite that, that over dominant amount of legalization that exists, but every market is different. And you're spot on. In Canada, they had medical long before they had adult use. Similar to California, there's a lot of similarities beyond that CA acronym that we both use. But you're spot on that they really treat it like medical. So it really is kind of a blank canvas, and they only allow, I believe, up to 20% of that canvas to your point, be some sort of branding, brand recognition, or labeling of the bag itself. That's another thing that's occurring on your side of the pond as well, with the Netherlands launching their beta program, which I believe approximately 10 companies have gotten on board with the supply side, but only 5 are online currently. We're working with a few of those, and it's the same thing. It's very, very minimal messaging allowed on the actual CPG or consumer packaging goods. They do allow some branding on the delivery package, though. So a lot of them are taking advantage of that. So if they're putting in 20 3.5 gram pouches or 2 gram pouches, the container actually comes in is actually a big promotional, and it's something that can be given away to the customer or, shown in the shop itself. So we do have some of those weird, quirky rules here in North America, but we're seeing it bleed over into the international space as well.
There's a workaround, yeah.
Yeah, definitely so. Another thing to mention is customer loyalty. So before jumping on this call, I mentioned just having attended Hall of Flowers in Northern California, and it is quite interesting because for the first time ever, now again, this is more normal in the international space, but for the first time here domestically, they allowed consumers to attend that show on day 2. So traditionally that show is connecting the growers, the producers, the processors with the distributors and the resellers and retailers. So it's the buyers and the sellers. But one thing that the buyers, have no problem with compared to the sellers is being able to build that brand recognition with the consumer, So love dispensaries, love bud tenders or cannabis consultants, as I call them, but they are kind of a stopgap in that communication between those who grow it and those who consume it. And they kind of control what that message, what that conversation, what that buying purchase is like. So it was nice to see that the consumers could come in and meet that grower and meet that brand and hear their story about how they're a full-term outdoor sun-grown organic versus indoor or light depth and nutrient enriched.
Yeah.
So that's where the customer loyalty comes in. So customer loyalty is specific to the brand as much as it is to the dispensary or the supplier. So it's something that there's obviously other things you can do, to be more attractive to that consumer. Again, some of those attributes that they're interested in, fully organic. I mean, that's for me, not just as a grower, but as a consumer, I like outdoor full-term organic. That's something that I feel Mother Nature's there for a reason. She supplies a lot to us, and she typically does most things right when it comes to growing plants. So again, to your point, this does depend on the state, on the country, on the territory, on what these rules and abilities are for you to build that brand loyalty. But it's something to be very mindful of if you are a plant touching entity.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So one thing to keep in mind, who should be involved with the packaging decision, obviously the owner of the company, because that's in many instances an extension of themselves and why and how and what they do in the industry. Obviously someone in the marketing side, the grower, the head retailer, but being mindful of something that communicates the message to that audience. And again, for any consumers that are watching, that is something that you all are very mindful of as well. Obviously, there's a lot of brands that you probably more so relate to. It could be the individual that represents that brand, who created that brand. It could be the grower. It could be the type of product they put out. Maybe you're a bigger fan of topicals, transdermals versus edibles and flour. But it is something that makes an impact on your decision, and having multiple people involved in that conversation is definitely an important factor as well.
Okay.
So how do we think consumers are landing on a product? And again, this varies from market to market, but it very much is. It's the packaging, it's their network, it's the bud tender or the individual that's educating them on the products available. So these are all things that are obviously relative to that buying cycle in purchasing that product. But a lot of people in this day and age too, especially domestically, we're seeing that the experiential. So a lot of people, when legalization started evolving here on the adult use side, which started in 2014 in the state of Colorado, a lot of people at first, it was really flashy in the intention and what got it. But then those people have kind of evolved and said, wait, this product I have a certain experience with, or this product I enjoy better than that product. So it really is association on the social level, not just on the sale level. So a term that was always used, I remember, and it got played out quite quickly, was seed to sale, seed to sale, seed to sale. Everyone in the industry is always talking about seed to sale. And that's when I started referencing the term seed to social, because if you don't care about how the consumer experiences your product or that brand, that interaction with the brand, they're going to lack any sort of brand loyalty and just find the next deal or the next thing that might be more suitable for them. So really being mindful from seed to social, not just as a brand, but also as a consumer. Again, like knowing where it's coming from, how it's being processed, what time and energy is being put into that product that I'm consuming, and if it's aligned with my ideologies of how that product should be.
And I think that's sorry, I can say that's more of a thing that seems to be happening across all kind of product categories at the moment, whether it be chocolate bars to, everything really. It's that whole, there's more, I think there's a kind of more mindful consumption kind of, I want to be mindful about the companies that I'm buying from as much as I am about quality of the products. And I think, again, it's almost kind of baked into the cannabis industry from the start. Do you feel like?
I think that's spot on, because you look at brands and you're right, even mainstream, a good example, not a perfect record. They had a little issues along the way, but Tony Chocolonely, you bring up chocolate. That's a very good example. I try to educate my son. He referenced something about Hershey's. I said, Hershey's really isn't the benchmark, especially not globally when it comes to chocolate. They're quite mediocre, because what they consider chocolate is below average, even just cocoa content compared to
nothing. Because I know they bought Cadbury's here in the UK, and it's not been the same since.
That's exactly it, and that's Cadbury's more so what I grew up, along with tea and English muffins, So totally get what you're saying, and I feel the same exact way. They tarnish some brands, but then you have someone like Tony Chocolonely, which is a good marketing case study that says, hey, we really want to tell the whole story of that chain of custody of that cocoa from raw to consumption, and we want to take ownership of making sure that it's the best product, but it's a fair product, a fair to the grower, a fair to the producer, us being Tony Chocolonely, and then a fair product to the consumer. And I agree with you. I think the consumers at large are starting to figure things out. And if we do kind of go back and pick on the Canadian market, the Canadians were really making decisions with their wallet. And so some of those brands that were putting out subpar or mediocre flour, a lot of them were putting out such dry flour you didn't need a grinder, to be quite honest. And that's sad when you're paying 70 Canadian, 50 US for an eighth. It's cool that the Royal Mail will deliver it to your door, but the 2 or 3 weeks it takes to get to you, and by the time it gets to you, the condition it's in was very much mediocre, even compared to what these individuals were able to purchase from the traditional market. So I agree with you, like consumers were finally figuring out that we're the ones with the power, because we're the ones with the money that these companies and these corporations want. So I agree with you. It's always kind of been more so there in the cannabis space, because it is an us and we, and it's a very community centric and community driven space versus the corporate world of food, pharmaceutical, alcohol, tobacco, etc., where those corporate giants are really manipulating that decision. Even if you think you have a choice, here's a good example. And the US doesn't do everything best, right? It's extreme capitalism. About 27 of the different beer brands on the shelf in a given grocery store here are all owned by Anheuser-Busch. So are you really making a decision when you're getting it from the same company that has the same standards across the board? Not so much so, which is why we saw a big movement in microbrews and consumers going, I don't want the big AB product. I want something that this guy produced in my backyard that I know is going to be higher quality with the best ingredients versus what these guys are putting out. So you make a very excellent point that we have more of a decision, I think, in this category than in other commercial categories, for sure.
Yeah, awesome.
Testing out package prior to selecting. This is something that's a little more centric, again, to people that are on the supply side, but making sure you're finding the right package that works for you and is able to communicate the message. So you want to, obviously, most people want to emulate quality while they want to communicate the benefits of the product. And that's one thing that you definitely have this clean slate to be able to work with. Sometimes you have a larger slate than other. You can tell by the different formats here. We recognize all these different formats. This is something, again, to your point, that you could take this and apply this to Eastern medicine just as much as you could to pharma or anything else. We have these different sizes, different iterations, but being mindful of the way you present your product. And then I need to do another audit of latest trends, but this is from back in 22, kind of doing a clean audit just of, the things that we've seen as far as an evolution. And again, I think we'll see this in the global market as well, increase emphasis on terpenes as people start to realize that cannabinoids are the engine, but terpenes are the steering wheel of this car. So really the experiential comes with the diverse terpenes. So these are just trends that we see, and I think it's really based on consumer demand. And to your point, what the consumer wants versus what the company thinks they want. So the increased emphasis on terpene, prepackaged and branded buds. So something that these individuals know that quality has been maintained and sustained from takedown to consumption, where traditionally, and you still see this in markets like Holland or Spain, specifically Barcelona, where it's still what we call a deli style, where you have these people that are using their bare hands or maybe tongs to pull one bud, two buds out that you choose.
Yeah.
How much contamination could be going on there? How much degradation by it just sitting in a jar that isn't even airtight? These are the things that in legal commercial markets, we're starting to see this evolution. Less is more. So clean packaging, and this kind of goes back again to when we were kids, to your point. When you go down to the local 5 and dime and get some candies, it came in a bag. It came in just something super simple that said candies or said crisps on the side of it. Just this very simple packaging and not over the top. And then sophisticated printing in different materials that really attract the individual. A good example here in the
literal elevation of the kind of category, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. And it's like, I think you've seen these before, Dave, where this is a collaboration we do with Mossy Giant, artist out of Holland, but we do Velvet Soft Touch, because just the experience that people go, God, I like how this feels. I like how it's not glossy, or it's not like it really has this texture to it. And it's interesting because we're attracted to things like that. People forget that we use all of our senses. When we're looking to have something to eat and looking through a menu, the things that are sold the most are the things that have pictures, because we're eating with our eyes, we're eating with our nose, we're eating with our hands, we're eating with our mouth. Like, there's so many sensory things, and that's applicable to cannabis as well. You want to see it, you want to smell it, and then you want to experience it. So being mindful of that in your packaging and trying to communicate what that experience will be like is definitely a major factor to success as well for brands. Point of sale, POS, as we say, right? Or point of purchase, POP, choices. And this is something obviously you see here. This would be a dispensary in the States, and there's just a plethora. This is like my local Legendary Organics, which is a local dispensary to me here in Southern California. They have a lot of decisions. And as a marketer, it's interesting. I try to take myself out of my work shoes and put myself in a consumer shoes and go, well, what is most attractive? What's catching my eye? And so obviously it's a subjective experience for each individual. But the first interaction really sets the tone, because is it communicating to me the quality of that product, maybe the potency of that product, the source of that product. So again, prepackaged has been a better experience for most consumers, and personally, I'm a purveyor of that versus going back to the Colorado days, again, where they had a lot of jars of flour, and you just saw the bud, and you didn't know where it came from, but you knew that maybe this one looked more attractive than that one. So another thing is just how it's packaged. What it's packaged in, it's a factor too.
No, I mean, here's a question. I mean, in terms of if someone's coming new to this, they say, like, I say cannabis is legal, I want to try it out, I don't know anything about it, go into a dispensary and I see something like this, I'm going to go, okay, right. So, but do you feel like brands are more aware, or to what extent are they sort of positioning their brand around, oh, it makes you feel like this, or this particular product does that? It's the kind of the effect, the impact stuff. Yes, cannabis noobs will want to kind of figure out, and like how are they kind of addressing that? Or do you see that more and more in the US, the brands?
You do. Yeah. I'd say we really saw that trend, excuse me, I'm going on my 11th year here, and I want to say I saw that trend really come about in the late teens. It was about 18, 19, where you had these companies, and it wasn't so much those that were offering flour or raw material as a product or end product. It was more so those that were offering vapes or edibles. And they were putting an emphasis on the experiential because they can influence that, especially in concentrates. So just as a case in point, CBN or cannabidiol, if you have a higher level of CBN, 2, 3, 4%, CBN is honestly, it's just an oxide. I call it a ghost cannabinoid because it's just the oxidized iteration of THC, which is very easy to produce in ethanol, CO2 when you're doing extraction. But to promote CBN, that's a sleep aid. Just like if you look at the terpenes, myrcene is known to be more of a sedative versus pinene, which is more of an alert. So to your point, a lot of companies did start leaning in and go, oh, CBN, this one's for sleep. Oh, CBG and CBD, higher levels, this one's for pain. So they are starting to really get into that. And they went as far as a lot of adjectives used, right? So a lot, for alert, for sleepy, for lazy, and so many people use so many different iterations, but essentially they were trying to tell you what that end user experience. But that's kind of, again, that's subjective because, Dave, you have an endocannabinoid system. I have an endocannabinoid system. My dog has every mammal has an ECS, but how we uptake is one element, but then how we experience from the cannabinoids and terpenes that we intake is another.
Yeah, exactly.
So something sleepy for me might be a little more alert for you, just based on how your body,
probably
processes.
Not. Probably not. Still, no. I think that's right, and that's something to bear in mind. And again, you can't necessarily rely on the effect as a kind of calling card when it comes to presenting the brand. Again,
correct.
Because again, that would be, I guess, false advertising to an extent, and you can't sort of say, disclaimer depends on your ECS type thing.
Yeah. It comes back to education.
Yeah.
Quality loss. So again, the packaging matters. I share with you, we just did a study. We found that turkey bags were the absolute worst. It just allows too much transient oxygen and moisture to come in and out of the environment, so you can't really create a controlled environment. Glass jars, porous, non-UV protectant, a horrible leak down, which means, again, allowing a certain amount of oxygen and moisture to escape and or enter based on your relative humidity and pressure and such. But even some of the pill jars and such, they just aren't quite designed for preserving biomass. They're designed for keeping powdered pills in a safe place with a child safety element to it. So flexible versus rigid, this is another thing we talk about quite often. More people are going more towards flexible just because of it's lighter, it's more convenient. It's to believe it or not, easier to recycle. It takes less energy to produce and to recycle. So while glass looks good from an aesthetic standpoint, what do you do with all these jars, and how much do you pay as a producer? How much are you paying for those materials and transporting those materials, and the potential loss of those materials due to breakage or damage in transit?
Yeah.
Again, some common retail packaging we're still seeing, and this is something we saw, again, not to pick on Canada, but they're one of the first G7 in the world to legalize adult use. We saw all of this. We saw Mylar, we saw pop tops, hard containers. I saw cosmetic containers being used. I saw pharmaceutical containers being used. So there hasn't really been a normalization. It's almost been more so kind of a convenience element. But different marketing, different styles. This is one thing we have seen is when you have that surface area to create that message, to your point, what is the experience, or what is the source, or what is the product details inside? These things all matter to the consumer, especially in the legal space. So always a factor. And what we're seeing, we've seen, you've been to cookies, I'm sure, in Barcelona or in Amsterdam. Having that vibrant blue color is their staple. So people know that's a cookies bag when they see it. But seeing some of the more traditional craft paper style colors to kind of emulate more of that organic and earth tones. Again, personally, for me, I'm not much into kind of the whole kind of cookies loud. I'm more into the natural and more kind of Eastern feel. That's just something for me as a marketer. I like earth Pantones, but I'm attracted more so to that. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that.
It has that kind of, that, like you say, that connotation of organic, it's almost like a shorthand, isn't it? I think visually that's part and parcel of it, isn't it?
Exactly true. And then one thing to be mindful of, and we have some of the strictest regulations, not just in this market, but others, alcohol bottles and again, packs of cigarettes don't have any sort of child restraint, but we do have child resistant packaging in this space, and most regulated markets do. They make sure that they have that protection, even though, it's something that obviously isn't quite as easy to consume per se, compared to something like alcohol, but we do have those restrictions, and those definitely matter. And do you need child safety packaging? Again, like you asked, it's a bit of patchwork here in the States as far as legalization goes. The one thing that's fairly consistent is every market has an element of child resistant packaging that's required, which we love to see. That's something that I think, just personally as an advocate and as a medical patient myself, like, this matters. I don't want my kids getting into my medicine just as much as I wouldn't want them to get into, if I had Advil or ibuprofen or anything else on the shelf, I wouldn't want them to get into that either.
Like going above and beyond, but with good reason. Yeah,
exactly true. So again, same rules, better branding. That's something that is definitely a matter. But again, no matter if you're on this side or if you're on the consumer side, being cognizant of these things, seeing what's out there, making sure what you're buying is really what you're buying, not just the label. And being cognizant of it definitely matters. And I'd say kind of takeaways is just, packaging doesn't impact the quality of the product. So that's something we always share, is properly storing it, properly preserving it. Is that quality? It matters. Again, rather you're a consumer or you're the one who took weeks upon weeks, if not months, if not longer, to create the perfect product. So that's something that definitely is an element as well. Increase emphasis on aesthetics, making sure you're communicating that right message. And again, as a consumer, making sure the message that you're seeing is succinct with what you're purchasing, following the regulation, and then standing out, making sure you stand out as a brand or as a product for that end user. Definitely all matters. So, yeah.
No, it's great stuff. Great stuff. No, it's I think more and more you're starting to see, a focus on sort of quality of things. It's not just accessibility. I mean, again, coming from what's mostly an illicit market here, well, we have medical, but again, what do we have? We still, we have the kind of right sort of packaging here. Well, I've got a Curaleaf, that's my current stuff. But again, it comes in like a nice little baggie like that. And more you're starting to see that rather than the kind of big plastic jars of kind of yesteryear, I think, that
exactly.
A while back. So that's good to see, because again, I can just, from the pure convenience perspective, you've got to carry around a jar with you, you can stick it in your bag. But again, it's that whole, you're starting to, it feels like these sort of things are more appropriate for the types of products anyway. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's more and more starting to see that. And I think probably from, as the kind of legal markets is sort of doing more things like this, and, they are presenting themselves as brands, not just here's some weed, go enjoy.
Exactly. Yeah, really building that relationship with the customer, with the consumer, or with the patient. It very much matters in this day and age, for sure.
Exactly.
So,
but no, and it's good stuff. But again, you've got more and more markets kind of opening up. We were talking earlier about Czech Republic, and is that we're going to see you next, probably?
Yes, yeah, you'll see me out at Cannabis in Prague. That's going to be the first week of November. So that'll be one of the last big international shows, at least that we have on our schedule. And then we've got MJ Biz, which is the big B2B show out here in Las Vegas, which will be the first week of December. And then we'll start it all over again in January. We think it's going to be quiet through the holidays. And every year I'm like, oh, it's finally MJ Biz, everything's over. And then all of a sudden here we are planning for Cannabis in spring and Mary Jane. And it's a lot, man. But yeah, definitely look forward to seeing you on the circuit again soon.
Yeah, definitely, Sam. Thank you so much. Thanks for doing your presentation. And yeah, we'll chat soon. Thanks, Lance.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.